I still remember the sharp sting of Cynthia's voice echoing through the ballroom that night. The golden chandeliers above glittered as if mocking me, their brilliance highlighting every smirk, every whispered insult from my so-called family. "You're broke, Emily. You don't matter anymore." Those words, spat with venom in front of dozens of guests at the Carter family gala, carved through me deeper than any knife. The laughter that followed, my Uncle Henry's condescending chuckle, my Aunt Patricia's feigned pity, made my cheeks burn. I felt like an exhibit, paraded only to be humiliated. I'd spent 3 months' salary on this dress. Navy blue silk that whispered against my skin as I moved, something elegant but not flashy. Something I thought would help me blend in with the Carter family. Elite. What a fool I'd been. Earlier that evening, I'd arrived at the Westmore Hotel with hope fluttering in my chest. The doorman had given me a small nod as I entered, unaware that I was the family disappointment. The marble foyer gleamed under crystal lights, reflecting the faces of New York's wealthiest as they floated past in designer suits and gowns that cost more than my monthly rent. "Emily!" My cousin Cynthia's voice had carried across the room, dripping with false sweetness. "You actually came." She air-kissed both my cheeks, her perfect red lips never touching my skin. At 34, Cynthia was everything I wasn't. Harvard Business School, married to a hedge fund manager, with twins who were already being groomed for prep school. "Of course," I'd replied, smoothing down my dress. "It's a family celebration." Her eyes had narrowed slightly. "Yes, family is so important to the Carters, those of us who uphold the name anyway." The dig wasn't subtle, but I'd forced a smile. My father, the family's black sheep, had died 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but debts and a small Brooklyn apartment I could barely afford to keep, while the rest of the Carters had built. Empire's dad had pursued his passion for art and community work. A waste, Uncle Henry had called it at the funeral. The evening had spiraled from there. Cocktail hour found me cornered by Aunt Patricia, who spent 15 minutes detailing her new summer house in the Hamptons, before asking, "And how's that little drafting job of yours?" "I'm a junior architect at Mercer & Associates," I corrected her, the same way I had at the last 3 family gatherings. "We're working on a sustainable housing project in—" "Fascinating," she'd cut me off, eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "You know, Henry's son just made partner at Goldman, 27 years old. Now that's ambition." By dinner, I'd retreated to the quiet dignity of my corner table, clearly positioned, as far from the main family as possible. I picked at my seared scallops while listening to toast after toast celebrating the Carter legacy of excellence and achievement. Then came the moment that broke me. Uncle Henry, flushed with expensive scotch, had risen for his speech about family values. His eyes had settled on me with calculated cruelty. "The Carter name has always stood for something," he'd announced to the rapt audience. "We build empires, legacies that stand the test of time." His gaze had hardened, though some branches of our family tree, unfortunately, bear less fruit. Titters had rippled through the crowd. "But that's the beauty of natural selection, isn't it? Some rise to the occasion." He'd gestured to his children and Cynthia, while others simply fade away. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room had turned to me, the Carter family failure. That's when Cynthia delivered the final blow, leaning over to me as she brushed past my table. "You're broke, Emily. You don't matter anymore." The words had hit like a physical force. I'd managed to hold myself together until I reached the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my burning face and stared at my reflection. My father's eyes looked back at me, kind, determined, entirely out of place among the Carter sharks. I couldn't stay another minute. I'd slipped out the service entrance, ignoring the curious glances from the kitchen staff, and walked out into the cool Manhattan night. Tears blurred the city lights into streaks of neon and gold as I wandered aimlessly, eventually crossing the bridge into Brooklyn. That's how I found myself pushing open the door to Sal's Diner at nearly midnight, a universe away from the glittering Carter Gala. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a warm red glow on the cracked vinyl booths. Only 2 other customers sat inside, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, and a man in a work uniform hunched over coffee. "Just you, hun?" asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with dyed blonde hair and kind eyes. I nodded, throat still tight with unspent tears. "Take any booth you like. Kitchen's closing soon, but I can get you coffee and pie at least." I slid into a corner booth, grateful for the anonymity. My silk dress looked absurdly out of place here, but no one seemed to notice or care. I ordered coffee, black, and stared out. The window at the Brooklyn street. Ordinary people walked past. No pretension, no family legacy to uphold, just living their lives. As I raised the mug to my lips, the bell above the door chimed. I didn't look up until I sensed someone standing beside my table. "This seat taken?" a gravelly voice asked. I glanced up to see an elderly gentleman in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He seemed entirely out of place in this modest diner, yet completely at ease. His silver hair was combed back neatly, and his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to look right through me, held a peculiar intensity. "No," I answered, gesturing vaguely at the empty seat across from me. "It's free." He settled himself with deliberate movements, placing a worn leather briefcase carefully on the seat beside him. The eye-bite waitress approached, but he waved her away with a polite smile. For several long moments, he simply studied me. I shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, wondering if I had mascara streaked down my face, or if my humiliation somehow showed. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "You look like my son." I blinked, unsure I'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" The old gentleman leaned forward, slightly. "My son, Thomas. You have his eyes. Same shape, same expression." He studied me further. "It's remarkable, actually." I set my coffee mug down, uncertain how to respond. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clattered. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I don't know anyone named Thomas." A small, sad smile creased his face. "No, you wouldn't. He passed away 30 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," I offered automatically. My discomfort was growing by the second, but something about his dignified presence kept me rooted to my seat. "Harold Whitaker," he said, extending a weathered hand across the table. "And you are?" "Emily Carter." I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip despite his age. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Carter? As in the New York Carters?" I stiffened. Even here, in this rundown diner, I couldn't escape the family name. "Yes," I admitted, though they might disagree with that association. Harold Whitaker's expression shifted, a flash of recognition crossing his features. "Richard Carter's daughter?" The mention of my father's name sent a jolt through me. "You knew my father?" "Indeed I did." Harold's eyes grew distant. "We were business partners once upon a time, before your Uncle Henry orchestrated our separation." The world seemed to tilt slightly. In all the family gatherings and all the stories about the mighty Carter Empire, I'd never heard my father described as anyone's business partner. According to family lore, Dad had always been the dreamer, the impractical one who'd squandered his portion of the inheritance on frivolous ventures. "That's not possible," I said, shaking my head. "My father was an artist. He ran a small community arts program in Brooklyn before he died. He wasn't a businessman." Harold's laugh was gentle but tinged with bitterness. "Is that what they told you? That Richard was just a dreamer with no head for business?" He shook his head, slowly. "Your father was brilliant, Miss Carter. One of the most innovative minds I've ever known. We built Whitaker Carter Investments together in the 80s. My mind raced. Whitaker Carter Investments? I'd never heard of it. "But the Carter family fortune comes from Carter Financial Group," I said. "That's Uncle Henry's company. Carter Financial Group rose from the ashes of what your father and I created," Harold said, his voice hardening slightly. "After Henry orchestrated our falling out." I sat back, trying to process this revelation. My father had never spoken of any business partnership, any company he'd founded. But then again, he'd rarely spoken about the family at all, preferring to focus on his art and community work after my mother died. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Finally. "Why now?" Harold Whitaker regarded me for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, he pulled the leather briefcase onto the table between us. The clasp made a soft click as he opened it. "Because time has a way of revealing truths, Miss Carter, and because I've spent the last year searching for you." My pulse quickened. "Searching for me? Why?" "To return what rightfully belongs to you." He withdrew a thick folder from the briefcase and placed it on the table. The logo on the front, a stylized WC, was faded but still visible. "When your father and I parted ways, certain arrangements were made. Legal documents were signed. Richard insisted on protecting your future, even if he couldn't be part of the company anymore." With careful fingers, Harold opened the folder. Inside were stacks of papers, legal documents, certificates, what looked like stock ownership records. My eyes caught on official-looking seals and signatures. "I don't understand," I whispered. Your Uncle Henry led everyone to believe that Richard sold his shares, that he walked away with nothing. The truth is that your father placed his ownership in a trust for you, Emily, one that would mature on your 30th birthday. My 30th birthday, 3 weeks from now. But that would mean I couldn't finish the thought. Harold's eyes held mine steadily as he leaned forward and spoke the words that would change everything. You are the rightful heir. The diner seemed to fall silent around us. Even the buzzing lights and distant kitchen sounds faded away. All I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat. Rightful heir to what, exactly? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. 48% of what is now called Carter Financial Group, plus the original Whitaker Carter patents and international holdings that Henry doesn't even know exist. He slid a document toward me. Approximately $440 million in total assets. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd been counting pennies to make rent. I'd been mocked for my sensible car and department store clothes, all while I was weeks away from inheriting. This can't be real, I said. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Harold's voice was firm. I've spent decades watching Henry Carter build his empire on stolen ideas and manipulation. I've waited for the right moment, for the terms of Richard's trust to mature. And now, here we are. But why didn't my father tell me any of this? Harold's expression softened. The terms of the settlement included a strict non-disclosure agreement. Richard couldn't tell anyone, not even you, until the trust matured. He protected you the only way he could. My mind flashed to my father's final days. The way he'd gripped my hand in the hospital, trying to tell me something, but too weak to form the words. Had he been trying to prepare me for this? Why are you helping me? I asked Harold. What do you get out of this? A sad smile crossed his face. Justice, Ms. Carter, and perhaps a chance to honor my friendship with your father. Richard saved my life once. Literally pulled me from a burning car. I could never repay that debt, but I can. Ensure his daughter receives what's rightfully hers. He carefully removed another document from the folder. This is the trust certification. On your 30th birthday, you'll need to present this to the firm listed here. Everything will be transferred to your name. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring slightly. And my family, Uncle Henry, Cynthia, all of them, they'll know the truth. That their fortune, their status, everything they've lorded over you, it was built on deception. And a significant portion of it legally belongs to you. I thought of Cynthia's cruel words just hours ago. You're broke, Emily. You don't matter anymore. Their faces will be priceless, I whispered, echoing my earlier thoughts. Harold nodded gravely. Indeed they will. The question is, Ms. Carter, what will you do with this knowledge? With this power? I looked down at my hands, then back at Harold Whitaker's expectant face. In that moment, I knew exactly what my father would have wanted, what he would have done. I'm going to do what my father would have done, I said slowly. Something good, something that matters. The week that followed my meeting with Harold was a blur of disbelief, revelation, and careful planning. I took a week of vacation from Mercer and Associates, claiming a family emergency, which in a way was true. Every morning, I met Harold at his law office in Midtown, where we combed through decades of documents and financial records. Henry was clever, Harold explained on the third day, spreading a timeline of company acquisitions across the mahogany conference table. He systematically erased your father from the company history, rebranded everything under the Carter name alone. I studied a photograph from 1986, my father and Harold standing proudly in front of their original office, arms around each other's shoulders, beaming with the confidence of young entrepreneurs. My father looked so different from the quiet, resigned man I'd known. Why did my father never fight back? I asked, tracing his face in the photograph. Harold's expression darkened. Because Henry threatened what Richard loved most. My mother and you. Harold passed me a folded letter, yellowed with age. This arrived the day after Richard announced he was leaving the company. The handwriting was unmistakably Uncle Henry's, sharp, angular strokes that matched his personality. I read it slowly, my blood turning cold with each line. Threats, not just against my father, but against my mother and the child. Me, barely 4 years old at the time. Henry discovered your father had evidence of financial improprieties, Harold continued. Nothing illegal, strictly speaking, but certainly unethical. Enough to damage Henry's reputation permanently. So Henry countered with threats of his own. But surely there were legal options, I protested. Richard chose peace over war, Emily. chose your safety and your mother's happiness over vindication. Harold's voice softened, but he was also strategic. He negotiated that trust for you, ensuring Henry couldn't touch it. Henry agreed, thinking it was a small price to pay for Richard's silence and complete withdrawal. Henry never expected the trust would amount to much, I realized. Precisely. He assumed without Richard's business acumen, the holdings would remain minimal. He didn't count on your father's foresight, or my decades of careful management from the shadows. Each day revealed new layers to the deception my family had constructed. The family mythology that my father had been the irresponsible dreamer who'd squandered his opportunities while Uncle Henry built a legacy was a carefully crafted lie. In reality, my father had been the visionary, the creative force behind their early success, while Henry had been the ruthless tactician who'd eventually forced him out. On Friday, Harold introduced me to Sophia Reyes, a razor-sharp attorney who specialized in trust law. You'll need representation when you confront the Carters, Harold advised. Sophia is the best, and she owes me a favor. Sophia, a formidable woman in her 40s with a sleek bob and eyes that missed nothing, assessed me coolly. This won't be easy, she warned, after reviewing the documents. The Carters will fight. They'll threaten. They'll try to paint you as an opportunist or a fraud. Are you prepared for that? Was I? The Emily Carter who'd slunk away from the gala in humiliation wouldn't have been, but something had shifted in me since that night at the diner. Yes, I said firmly. I'm my father's daughter. I can handle it. Sophia's serious expression gave way to a small smile. Good, because we move on your birthday. Not a day before, not a day after. The weekend brought a different sort of preparation. I stood in front of my closet Sunday morning, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed to belong to a different person. The careful, budget-conscious junior architect who'd been surviving paycheck to paycheck felt like a character I'd been playing. My phone buzzed. A text from Cynthia. Missed you at brunch today. Henry asked if your little drafting job is keeping you busy. Too busy for family? The barb was clear, as was the subtext. You're not really family anyway. I set the phone down without responding. In 3 more weeks, everything would change. But until then, I needed to maintain the facade. Tomorrow I would return to work, to my ordinary life, while Harold and Sophia continued preparations in the background. On Monday, I slipped back into the rhythm of, my job, reviewing blueprints and attending client meetings as if nothing had changed. My colleagues noticed nothing different, though Ms. Mercer, the firm's founder, gave me an odd look during our team meeting. You seem different, Emily, she commented as we gathered our materials afterward. More focused, I managed a neutral smile, just refreshed from some time off. That evening, I received another text, this time from Aunt Patricia. Annual family dinner at Le Cirque this Saturday. Henry insists all family attend. 7 p.m. sharp. My stomach clenched. I hadn't expected to face them before my birthday reveal. For a moment, I considered declining, claiming work obligations. But then a different thought surfaced. This would be the last time they would see me as poor Emily, the family disappointment. The last time they could look down on me without knowing what was coming. I texted back, I'll be there. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat on my small balcony overlooking the Brooklyn street below, thinking about my father. Had he struggled with similar sleepless nights after his split from the company? Had he ever regretted his choice to walk away, to protect us rather than fight? The next morning, I called Harold. I need to understand something, I said when he answered. Why didn't my father access any of this money when my mother got sick? We remortgaged the apartment to pay for her treatments. He picked up extra work teaching art classes at night. If he had all these assets in trust, Harold's sigh traveled through the phone. The terms of the trust were ironclad, Emily. No access until your 30th birthday. Richard structured it that way intentionally, to ensure Henry couldn't challenge it. But surely there were emergency provisions. None, Harold interrupted gently. Your father was protecting your future, even at the cost of his present comfort. He knew what Henry was capable of. He knew if there was any loophole, Henry would exploit it. I absorbed this in silence, tears pricking at my eyes. My father had suffered, had watched my mother suffer, all while knowing there was wealth he couldn't touch, wealth that rightfully belonged to our family. There's one more thing you should know, Harold continued. Your mother was aware of the trust. Richard couldn't tell you, but Sarah knew everything. She agreed with his decision. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. My mother had known? Had chosen this struggle, this careful life on the margins of the Carter wealth? Why? I whispered. Because they wanted you to become your own person, Emily. Not defined by Carter money or Carter expectations. They wanted you to discover your own path. As I hung up, I gazed around my small apartment, the second-hand furniture I'd carefully selected, the architectural sketches I'd framed myself, the plants thriving on my windowsill. This life I'd built, piece by modest piece. Perhaps my parents had given me something more valuable than immediate access to wealth. They'd given me perspective, independence, values that money couldn't buy. Saturday arrived all too quickly. I chose my outfit with deliberate care. A simple black dress that I'd owned for years, paired with my mother's pearl earrings. Nothing flashy, nothing that suggested any change in circumstances, just dignified simplicity. As my taxi approached Le Cirque, I took a deep breath. One last dinner as the family disappointment. One last night of their condescension, before everything changed. Le Cirque glittered with old-world opulence, a testament to the eye. Carter family's preference for established prestige over modern trends. The maitre d' recognized the Carter name immediately, his demeanor shifting from professional to deferential as he led me toward the private dining room. "The rest of your party has arrived, Ms. Carter," he informed me with a slight bow. I could hear them before I saw them. Uncle Henry's booming laugh, Aunt Patricia's practiced, trill, the general murmur of Carter conversations about Carter achievements. My steps slowed involuntarily. "Emily!" Cynthia's voice cut through the moment I entered. "You actually made it. We had a little wager going about whether you'd find an excuse." She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume expensive and cloying. Her husband Bradley nodded vaguely in my direction, already turning back to his conversation with Uncle Henry. "I wouldn't miss family dinner," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. Uncle Henry barely looked up from his scotch. "Grab a seat, Emily. We've already ordered appetizers." The table was arranged precisely as expected. Henry at the head, his wife Patricia to his right, their son Michael and his wife next to her. Cynthia and Bradley sat to Henry's left with their twins mercifully absent tonight. I was directed to the far end, beside Michael's wife Vanessa, who offered me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So, Emily," Patricia began once I was seated, "how's that little apartment of yours? Still in Brooklyn, I assume?" The question was designed to highlight the contrast between my modest living situation and their Manhattan penthouses and Hamptons estates. 3 weeks ago, it would have stung. Tonight, I merely smiled. "It suits me," I answered simply. "You know, Michael and Vanessa just closed on a place in Tribeca," Patricia continued. $17 million, but worth every penny for the river views. "Isn't that right, darling?" Michael nodded, shooting me a look that was equal parts pride and challenge. "Sometimes you have to invest in quality." The appetizers arrived, delicate towers of seafood and truffle-infused confections. As conversation flowed around me, I observed my family with new eyes. The careful positioning, the subtle hierarchies, the constant references to wealth and status. It all seemed so transparent now, almost pitiable in its desperation. "Carter Financial had another record quarter," Henry announced, swirling his scotch. "The board's talking expansion into Asian markets. Michael's heading up the initiative." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "Congratulations, Michael." My cousin looked surprised at my genuine tone, then suspicious. "Thanks," he replied curtly. "Emily's firm is working on affordable housing or something, isn't that right?" Cynthia interjected, her smile sharp. "Very charitable." "Actually, our sustainable design project just won a regional award," I said. "Ms. Mercer is considering me for project lead on the next phase." "How nice for you," Patricia murmured, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Though I've always thought architecture was such a competitive field. So hard to really stand out unless you're working on landmark projects. The main courses arrived, momentarily pausing the subtle barbs. I cut into my perfectly seared sea base, wondering what they would all be doing 3 weeks from now. Would they be huddled with their lawyers, frantically reviewing financial records, or perhaps sitting around this very table, strategizing how to challenge the trust? "Emily, you're awfully quiet tonight," Uncle Henry observed suddenly. "Something on your mind?" I met his gaze steadily. This man had threatened my parents, had forced my father out of the company they'd built together, had constructed an elaborate fiction about our family history. Yet he sat there radiating paternal authority, secure in his position at the head of the table. "Just thinking about my father, actually," I replied. A flicker of something. Discomfort? Concern? Crossed Henry's face. Richard, he said flatly. Well, we all miss him, of course. Do you? I asked, keeping my tone light. Miss him, I mean. The table fell silent. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly. What an odd question, Patricia cut in. Of course we miss Richard. He was family. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. Interesting how that word means different things to different people. Cynthia laughed nervously. God, Emily, don't get philosophical on us. It's just dinner. I smiled and returned to my sea bass. You're right, just dinner. The moment passed, but I felt Uncle Henry's eyes on me periodically throughout the meal, watchful and calculating. Had I said too much? Given something away? I didn't think so, but Henry had always been perceptive when it came to threats to his position. By dessert, an elaborately deconstructed tiramisu that none of the Carter women did more than poke at, the conversation had moved on to safer topics. Michael and Vanessa's upcoming vacation in Bali, Bradley's new yacht, the charity gala Patricia was chairing next month. You should attend, Emily, Patricia said, with the practiced generosity of someone who knows her offer will be declined. It's for the arts, after all. Your father would have approved. When is it? I asked. 3 weeks from Saturday. Black tie, of course. Tickets are $5,000 per person, but I'm sure we could find you a spot at one of the corporate tables. 3 weeks from Saturday. 2 days after my birthday. 1 day after the trust would be officially executed. That's very kind, I said. I'll check my calendar. Well, don't wait too long, Patricia sniffed. The seating chart is nearly finalized. As coffee was served, Uncle Henry leaned back in his chair, surveying his family with the satisfaction of a general reviewing his troops. A toast, he announced, raising his snifter of cognac. To the Carter legacy. To family. To family. Everyone echoed, raising their glasses. I lifted mine as well, meeting Henry's eyes across the table. To truth, I added quietly. His smile faltered just slightly, a momentary crack in the facade. Then he drained his glass and turned to Bradley, asking about market projections. As the evening wound down, I excused myself first, claiming an early meeting the next day. Cynthia followed me to the coat check. It was surprising. To see you tonight, she said, watching as the attendant retrieved my simple wool coat. You usually find a way to avoid these dinners. I turned to face her. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about legacies. Cynthia raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Legacies are for those who build them, Emily. Not everyone is meant to leave a mark. The same old message, you don't matter. You haven't earned your place. I accepted my coat with a smile. You know, Cynthia, I've always admired your confidence. She preened slightly at what she took as a compliment. The absolute certainty with which you view the world, I continued. It must be comforting, believing everything is exactly as it appears. Confusion flickered across her features. What's that supposed to mean? I buttoned my coat calmly. Nothing at all. Good night, Cynthia. It was an illuminating evening. As my taxi carried me back to Brooklyn, I gazed at the city lights reflecting on the river. For the first time since meeting Harold at the diner, I felt truly at peace with what was coming. Not because of the money or the vindication, but because I finally understood what my parents had tried to teach me. Worth wasn't determined by the Carter name or Carter money. Worth came from within, from integrity, from perseverance, from living by your own values rather than others' expectations. In 3 weeks, everything would change. But the person I was becoming, that transformation had already begun. The days marched steadily toward my 30th birthday. At work, I channeled my nervous energy into the sustainable housing project, staying late to perfect renderings and refined structural elements. Ms. Mercer noticed. I'm impressed, Emily, she said one evening, finding me still at my drafting table well past 7. This level of dedication doesn't go unnoticed. I looked up from the community garden space I was designing. Thank you. I believe in this project. She leaned against my desk, studying me with shrewd eyes. You know, there's an associate position opening up next quarter. You should apply. An associate position. The next step toward partnership, something I'd been working toward for years. 2 months ago, I would have been ecstatic. Now, I wasn't sure what my professional future held. I'll think about it, I promised. Ms. Mercer nodded. Do that. You have real talent. Emily. The kind that shouldn't be wasted. After she left, I sat back in my chair, considering her words. Real talent. Not Carter money, not family connections, just my own abilities, recognized on their own merit. Whatever happened with the inheritance, I realized I didn't want to lose this part of myself, this identity I'd built separate from the Carter name. The weekend before my birthday, Harold and Sophia called me to Harold's office for final preparations. "The paperwork is ready," Sophia explained, sliding a folder across the polished table. "On Tuesday, your birthday, we file these with the court and with Carter Financial's board of directors simultaneously. By Wednesday morning, the transfer of assets will begin." "And my family?" I asked. "When do they find out?" Harold and Sophia exchanged glances. "Henry will be notified as CEO on Tuesday afternoon," Harold said. "The rest of the board immediately after. Given the size of the holdings being transferred, there will be regulatory filings that become public by Wednesday." "So everyone will know by Wednesday," I said, trying to imagine the chaos that would ensue at Carter headquarters. "Essentially," Sophia confirmed, "we expect immediate legal challenges. Henry will claim the trust is fraudulent, that your father forfeited these rights decades ago. He'll try for an emergency injunction. Will he succeed?" I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Sophia's expression hardened. "Not while I'm breathing. We've prepared for every contingency, every argument his team might make. The documentation is ironclad. Your father and Harold were nothing if not thorough." I nodded, relief washing through me. "What happens after the transfer begins? Practically speaking, I mean. You'll need to decide how to manage your holdings," Harold explained. "You could sell your shares back to Carter Financial at a premium, certainly, or you could maintain your ownership position and take a seat on the board." The thought of sitting across from Uncle Henry at board meetings, having a say in the company my father had helped build, sent a thrill through me. "There's another option," Sophia added. "You could use your leverage to negotiate a settlement, something that acknowledges your father's contributions while allowing you to pursue your own path." I considered this. "I need to think about it." "Of course," Harold said gently. "These are significant decisions. But Emily," he leaned forward, "whatever you choose, remember why your father structured things this way. He wanted to give you options, freedom, not to burden you with obligation." Monday, the day before my birthday, dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully for work in a tailored navy suit I'd splurged on months ago. Today was my last day as ordinary Emily Carter. Tomorrow, everything would change. Ms. Mercer caught me in the hallway mid-morning. "Emily, can you join the client presentation for the Riverfront project? Martin's out sick, and you're more familiar with the sustainability features than anyone else." I agreed readily, grateful for the distraction. The presentation went well, the clients responding enthusiastically to my explanations of the passive cooling systems and community green spaces. For a few hours, I was completely absorbed in the work I loved, the looming inheritance temporarily forgotten. That evening, I walked home through Brooklyn instead of taking the subway, savoring the familiar sights and sounds of my neighborhood. The corner bodega where Mr. Ramirez always saved me the ripest avocados. The secondhand bookstore where I'd spent countless Sunday afternoons browsing dusty architecture volumes. The tiny Italian restaurant where I celebrated small victories with paper-thin pizza and house wine. Would I still live here after tomorrow? Would I still be the same Emily who found joy in these simple pleasures? I wanted to believe money wouldn't change me fundamentally, but I wasn't naive. Power and wealth transformed people. I'd seen it in my own family. My phone buzzed with a text from Cynthia. "Don't forget your birthday dinner tomorrow night. Le Bernardin, 8 p.m. Don't be late." I'd completely forgotten about the Carter family tradition of birthday dinners. Every year, regardless of how they treated me otherwise, the family gathered to mark Carter birthdays with an elaborate meal at a Michelin-starred restaurant. The tradition was less about celebrating the person and more about maintaining appearances, the fiction of Carter family unity. This year's dinner would be especially ironic, falling on the very day the trust would be executed. By dinner time tomorrow, would they already know? Would Henry have received the notification? Or would I be sitting across from them watching them maintain their condescension, knowing their world was about to implode? I texted back, "I'll be there." When I reached my apartment, I found a small package waiting outside my door. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a vintage Montblanc pen and a note in Harold's distinctive script. "Your father used this to sign the original company documents. Seemed fitting you? Should have it now. Happy birthday, Emily." Tears pricked my eyes as I held the heavy pen, imagining my father's hands gripping it decades ago, full of hope and ambition for the company he and Harold were building. Had he ever imagined it would end up this way? His daughter poised to reclaim what he had been forced to surrender? I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of boardrooms and family, dinners, of my father's face and Uncle Henry's fury. When dawn broke on my 30th birthday, I lay awake watching the light change across my ceiling, a strange calm settling over me. My phone chimed with birthday messages from friends and co-workers, but nothing yet from the Carter side of the family. They saved their obligatory acknowledgments for the dinner. I dressed in jeans and a sweater, planning to work remotely for the morning before meeting Harold and Sophia at the law offices at noon. As I made coffee, my phone rang. Harold. "Happy birthday, Emily," he said when I answered. "Ready for today?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "Any last-minute advice?" There was a slight pause. "Just remember, after today, people will see you differently. Some will treat you better because of your wealth. Others will resent you for it. The challenge is remembering who you really are beneath it all, who my father raised me to be," I said softly. "Exactly." His voice warmed. "Richard would be proud of you, Emily. Not because of the money, but because of how you're handling all this, with dignity and grace." After we hung up, I sat by my window, watching Brooklyn wake up around me. Regular people heading to regular jobs, unaware that a few blocks away, a quiet architect was about to become one of the wealthiest women in New York. I thought about what Harold had said, about people seeing me differently. Would Ms. Mercer still be impressed by my dedication if she knew I didn't need the salary? Would my colleagues still invite me for happy hour beers if I could buy the bar? Would potential dates see me, or just the Carter fortune? At 11:30, I gathered my things and headed toward the subway that would take me to Midtown, to Harold's office, to my new reality. As I walked, I made a silent promise to myself and to my parents' memory. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't let money change the core of who I was. I would use it to build something meaningful, something that honored my father's legacy of creativity and integrity. The inheritance wasn't just about justice or revenge. It was about reclaiming a narrative that had been stolen, not just from my father, but from me. The law offices of Whitaker and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a sleek midtown tower, offering panoramic views of the city my family had helped build. Harold met me in the reception area, dapper as always in a charcoal suit, his eyes bright with anticipation. "The birthday girl arrives," he said warmly, embracing me briefly. "Sophia's waiting in the conference room. Everything's ready." I followed him down a corridor lined with law books and framed credentials into a spacious room dominated by a massive oak table. Sophia stood at its head, arranging documents with military precision. She looked up as we entered, her professional demeanor briefly softening. "Happy birthday, Emily," she said. "Are you ready to become a very wealthy woman?" I managed a shaky smile. "I think so." "Excellent." She gestured to the chair at the head of the table. "Let's get started." What followed was a blur of signatures and notarizations, explanations of financials, mechanisms, and legal provisions. The trust documentation alone ran to over 200 pages, each requiring my signature or initials. I signed until my hand cramped, Harold's vintage Mont Blanc pen flowing smoothly across page after page. "And that," Sophia announced after nearly 2 hours, "is the final signature. Congratulations, Ms. Carter. You are now officially the controlling shareholder of the original Whitaker Carter Holdings and a major stakeholder in Carter Financial Group." I set down the pen, flexing my fingers. "That's it? It's done?" "The documents will be filed electronically within the hour," Sophia confirmed. "Notifications will go out to all relevant parties by end of business today." "Including Uncle Henry," I murmured. "Including Henry," Harold confirmed, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "By this time tomorrow, everyone will know." Sophia's assistant entered with a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. "A little celebration seems in order," she said, expertly popping the cork. As we sipped the bubbling wine, I felt oddly detached from the moment, as if watching myself from a distance. Had I really just signed documents making me worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Was I really about to turn the Carter family hierarchy upside down? "What happens next?" I asked, setting down my barely touched champagne. "Now we wait for the reaction," Sophia explained. "Henry will receive formal notification by 3 p.m. today, the rest of the board shortly after. We expect immediate legal challenges." "Will they come after Harold for helping me?" Harold chuckled. "Let them try. I've been waiting 30 years for this moment. I've covered every legal angle." "And what about tonight?" I asked. "The family birthday dinner?" Harold and Sophia exchanged glances. "That's entirely your choice," Sophia said carefully. "You could cancel, of course, Or you could attend and see how they react, assuming Henry has informed them by then. Or they might not know yet, Harold added. Corporate notifications don't always travel quickly to personal knowledge. Henry might keep it to himself initially, consulting with lawyers before telling the family. I considered my options. Part of me wanted to avoid the confrontation, to let the legal notifications do their work without having to witness the fallout firsthand. But another part, the part that remembered every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment of humiliation, wanted to be there when the mighty Carters realized their world had shifted. I'll go, I decided. Whether they know or not, it will be interesting. After finalizing a few more details with Sophia about the days ahead, I left the law office feeling strangely light, as if the weight of secrets had been lifted. I checked my watch, nearly 4 o'clock. Uncle Henry would have received the notification by now. Was he raging in his corner office, frantically calling his lawyers? Or was he staring in disbelief at documents he never expected to see? I had 4 hours before the birthday dinner. Too wired to return to my apartment, I walked through Central Park instead, watching families and tourists enjoy the spring afternoon, oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding in the towers surrounding them. I found a bench near the lake and sat, observing the toy sailboats drifting across the water, steered by excited children and indulgent parents. My phone remained suspiciously quiet. No texts or calls from any family members canceling dinner or acknowledging the bombshell that had just been dropped. Either they didn't know yet or they were plotting their response. Knowing the Carters, I suspected the latter. At 7:30, I took a taxi to Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. An elegant but understated black dress, my mother's pearls, and a confidence I'd never worn to a Carter family gathering before. The maitre d' greeted me with the deference reserved for Carter reservations. The rest of your party is already seated, Ms. Carter. Please follow me. As I followed him through the hushed, elegant space, I noticed diners turning to look at me, not past me as they usually did. Did I already carry myself differently? Or was it simply the knowledge inside me, radiating outward? The private dining room door opened, and I stepped inside, bracing myself for whatever awaited. The scene before me was surreal in its normality. Uncle Henry at the head of the table, swirling his scotch. Aunt Patricia examining the menu with her reading glasses perched on her nose. Michael and Vanessa in quiet conversation. Cynthia tapping at her phone. Bradley beside her looking bored. No rage, no accusations, no acknowledgement that anything had changed. They didn't know. Emily, finally, Aunt Patricia said, glancing at her watch. We were about to order without you. I took my assigned seat, at the far end of the table, of course, and unfolded my napkin. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. Uncle Henry raised his glass. A toast to the birthday girl, 30 years old. My, how time flies. Everyone dutifully raised their glasses. Happy birthday, Emily, they chorused with varying degrees of enthusiasm. I smiled, meeting Henry's eyes across the table. Was that a tightness around his mouth? A slight strain in his expression? Or was I imagining it? Thank you all for coming, I said. It means a lot to have family around on my birthday. Dinner proceeded with the usual Carter dynamics. Conversation revolved around their achievements, their possessions, their social standing. I listened more than spoke, watching them with new eyes, wondering how they would react when they discovered the truth. As the main course was cleared, Cynthia turned her attention to me. So, Emily, what exciting plans do you have for your 30s? Still drafting other people's visions? Or have you thought about actually doing something significant? Before I could answer, Uncle Henry's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then excused himself from the table. Something in his abrupt movement caught my attention. His face had drained of color. He knew. Emily was just about to tell us her grand plans, Cynthia prompted when I didn't immediately respond. I smiled, watching the door through which Henry had disappeared. Actually, I'm exploring some new opportunities, ones that might surprise you. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Oh? Has that little firm of yours finally offered you a proper position? Something like that, I said vaguely. I'm considering taking on a more significant leadership role, Cynthia snorted delicately. Leadership role? In what, the local arts council? Following in dear Richardsy? Footsteps? The door burst open. Uncle Henry stood there, his face a mask of barely contained fury. In his hand was his phone, and I could guess what he'd just been reading. Emily, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. A word. Now. The table fell silent. everyone's eyes darting between us. I set my napkin down and rose calmly. Of course, Uncle Henry. I followed him out of the dining room, into a small private lounge adjacent to the main restaurant. The moment the door closed behind us, he whirled to face me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, waving his phone in my face. These ridiculous claims. This so-called trust. Do you have any idea what you're messing with? I met his gaze steadily. I believe I'm claiming what rightfully belongs to me, Uncle. Henry, what belonged to my father before you forced him out? Your father? Henry's face contorted with rage. Richard was weak. He didn't have what it took to build an empire. Everything the Carter name stands for today is because of me. Is that what you've told yourself all these years? I asked calmly. That my father was weak? That you didn't systematically push him out of the company he co-founded? Henry's eyes narrowed. Who put these ideas in your head? That old fool, Harold Whittaker? He's been bitter for decades because he backed the wrong Carter. He backed the honest Carter, I countered. And now I have proof. Documents, signatures, the original trust my father established that you thought would amount to nothing. This is absurd, Henry snapped, but I could. See uncertainty flickering behind his anger. Whatever Harold's shown you is forged or manipulated. Richard signed away his rights to the company. I have the paperwork. Paperwork he signed under duress, I said, my voice hardening. After you threatened my mother. After you threatened me. Henry flinched almost imperceptibly. That's a serious accusation. I have the letter, Uncle Henry. One where you spelled out exactly what would happen to your 4-year-old niece if my father didn't cooperate. The color drained from Henry's face again. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected me to know everything. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. I've spent the past 3 weeks with Harold and a team of lawyers going through every document. My father was thorough. He kept evidence of everything, the threats, the manipulation, the systematic erasure of his contributions to the company. Henry's expression shifted from rage to calculation. I recognized it well. The look he got when reassessing a business situation, searching for leverage. What do you want? He asked finally. Money? Is that it? Name your price and we can make this go away. Quietly. I almost laughed. It's not about money, Uncle Henry. It's about truth. About justice for my father. Justice? He scoffed. There's no justice in business, Emily. Only winners and losers. Your father lost. That's all there is to it. No, I said firmly. My father chose family over fortune. He walked away to protect his wife and daughter. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. For a moment, something like doubt crossed Henry's features. Then his face hardened again. Fine. You want to play hardball? I have an army of lawyers who will tie this up in court for years. You'll spend every penny of your supposed inheritance fighting me. Is that what you want? My legal team is prepared for that, I replied. But is that what you want, Uncle Henry? A public legal battle where all your methods, all your manipulations, all your threats come to light? Where the Carter name you've worked so hard to elevate is dragged through the mud? That hit home. If there was one thing Henry valued above money, it was the Carter reputation, the legacy he'd constructed. The board won't stand for this, he tried. The shareholders will be very interested to learn that the company's founding documents have been misrepresented for decades, I cut in. That significant patents and international holdings have been concealed. That the Carter Financial Group as they know it was built on lies. We stood there, locked in silent confrontation. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of the restaurant. Clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the normal backdrop to an abnormal moment. Finally, Henry's shoulders sagged slightly. What do you want? He asked again, but this time there was resignation in his voice. A seat at the table, I said simply. Acknowledgement of my father's role in founding the company, and a restructuring of certain assets. That's it? After all this drama, you just want recognition? I smiled. And 48% of the company, of course. That's non-negotiable. It's legally mine as of today. Henry's face twisted. You'll destroy everything I've built. No, I countered. I'll honor what my father helped build. There's a difference. Before he could respond, the door opened. Cynthia stood there, her expression curious and concerned. Is everything okay? The dessert is being served and... She stopped, noticing the tension between us. What's going on? Henry shot me a warning look, but I'd had enough of Carter's secrets. Uncle Henry was just coming to terms with some new information, I said calmly, about my father's role in founding Carter Financial, and about my new position as a major shareholder. Cynthia laughed nervously. What are you talking about? You're not a shareholder in anything. Actually, she is, Henry said tightly. Apparently, your Uncle Richard left certain arrangements that have just come to light. Confusion spread across Cynthia's features. What arrangements? What does that mean? I met her gaze directly. It means that as of today, I own 48% of Carter Financial Group, more than Uncle Henry, more than anyone. Cynthia's perfectly made up. Face went slack with shock. That's not possible. You're just Emily, the broke cousin, the disappointment. I was never a disappointment to my father, I said quietly. And it turns out, he made sure I would never be broke again. Henry rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking older than his years. Let's get back to the table. We'll discuss this as a family. As a family? I echoed. That's an interesting choice of words, Uncle Henry. When have the Carters ever treated me as family? He had no answer for that. We returned to the dining room where lavish desserts sat untouched as everyone sensed the shift in atmosphere. Aunt Patricia's eyes darted between Henry's grim expression and my calm demeanor. What's happening? She demanded. Henry? He sank heavily into his chair. It seems we have a situation. A legal matter regarding Richard's estate. Michael frowned. Richard died years ago. What legal matter? Emily, Henry said, gesturing to me. Perhaps you'd like to explain. All eyes turned to me. I'd imagined this moment for weeks. The revelation, the shock, the sweet taste of vindication. But now that it was here, I felt no desire to gloat or humiliate, just a quiet determination to set things right. My father, along with Harold Whitaker, founded what became Carter Financial, I began. When he was forced out of the company, he established a trust in my name, a trust that matured today, on my 30th birthday. Patricia scoffed. Richard didn't have 2 pennies to rub together when he died. What kind of trust could he possibly have established? One worth approximately $440 million, I said calmly, comprising 48% of Carter Financial Group and various other holdings. The stunned silence that followed was everything I'd imagined. Cynthia's mouth hung open. Michael had gone pale. Patricia clutched her pearl necklace as if it might anchor her to reality. That's not possible, Bradley finally sputtered. The company. Henry controls the company. Not anymore, I said simply. As of today, I am the largest single shareholder of Carter Financial Group. Patricia turned to Henry, her voice shrill. Is this true? Henry, tell me this isn't true. Henry's jaw clenched. We're looking into the legal validity of these claims. They're valid, I assured them. The documents have been verified by multiple law firms. The transfer of assets has already begun. So what now? Michael demanded. You waltz in and take over? You don't know the first thing about running a financial empire? I smiled. I don't intend to take over day-to-day operations, Michael. I'm an architect, not a financial executive, but I will have a say in how the company is run, and in how it honors its true history. The remainder of that birthday dinner was unlike any Carter family gathering I'd ever attended. The usual hierarchies had dissolved, replaced by a stunned silence punctuated by urgent whispers and incredulous questions. Uncle Henry attempted to maintain his authority, assuring everyone that his legal team would sort out this misunderstanding. But the damage was done. The doubt had been planted. The mighty Henry Carter, architect of the family fortune, suddenly seemed fallible. I left Le Bernardin just after 10, declining offers from both Michael and Cynthia to talk privately. Their sudden interest in conversation with the cousin they'd dismissed for years was as transparent as it was predictable. I'm happy to meet next week, I told them, gathering my purse. Once everyone's had time to process the situation. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. There was no going back now. For better or worse, I had reclaimed my father's legacy and transformed my position in the Carter hierarchy forever. The next morning, my phone began ringing at 6 a.m. Calls from Henry, from Patricia, from Cynthia, from various lawyers. I let them go to voicemail. This was my moment, and I would control the pace of what happened next. At 9, I met Harold for breakfast at a quiet cafe near his office. You did it, he said, his eyes bright with pride. How do you feel? I considered the question, stirring my coffee thoughtfully. Less vengeful than I expected. More purposeful. Harold nodded. That's good. Revenge is a hollow victory. Purpose endures. Their faces, though, I admitted with a small smile. When they realized what was happening, that was something I'll never forget. Priceless, Harold agreed. But the real question is, what now, Emily? What do you want to do with your father's legacy? It was the question I'd been pondering all night. What did I want? Not just financially, but for my life, for my future, for the Carter name I'd inherited. I want to build something, I said slowly. Not just buildings, though I still love architecture. I want to build a different kind of legacy, one my father would be proud of. Over the following weeks, the Carter family dynamics shifted dramatically. Uncle Henry, after initial bluster and threats, gradually accepted the new reality, partly because his lawyers confirmed the trust's validity, and partly because I offered him a compromise. He would remain CEO of Carter Financial, but with oversight from a restructured board that included me and 2 independent directors. "You're being remarkably reasonable," he grudgingly acknowledged during one of our negotiations. "I expected you to push for my removal. That would be vindictive," I replied. "And bad for business. You're a skilled executive, Uncle Henry. I just want to ensure the company operates with transparency going forward." The wider family adjusted to the new power structure with varying degrees of grace. Aunt Patricia avoided me entirely for the first month, then made awkward overtures at the summer charity gala, the same event she'd condescendingly suggested I attend. Cynthia swung between resentment and forced friendliness, unsure how to treat the cousin she'd dismissed for so long, who now wielded significant influence. The most surprising development came from Michael. After the initial shock, he approached me with a candor I hadn't expected. "I've been a jerk to you," he admitted over coffee one afternoon. "For years, I followed Dad's lead, saw you the way. He taught me to see you as the family failure," I supplied. He winced. "Yeah, and I'm sorry for that. It was easy, I guess, to believe the story we were all told. About my father? That he was weak, irresponsible?" Michael nodded. "Dad always painted Uncle Richard as the cautionary tale. Don't be like Richard, or you'll end up with nothing." He shook his head. "Now I wonder what else he lied about." Our conversation marked the beginning of a tentative reconciliation, not just with Michael, but with parts of my family history I'd never fully understood. Through Harold's stories and documents my father had left behind, I pieced together a truer picture of Richard Carter. Not the failure I'd been led to believe, but a principled man who'd chosen family over fortune, who'd protected what mattered most. 6 months after my birthday revelation, I made 2 significant decisions. First, I established the Richard Carter Foundation for Community Arts, dedicated to supporting the kind of grassroots creative programs my father had championed after leaving the company. The foundation's first project, renovating the Brooklyn Community Center where Dad had taught art classes during my, childhood. Second, I accepted Ms. Mercer's offer of partnership at her architecture firm, with the understanding that I would focus on sustainable community projects. "You don't need the salary anymore," she pointed out when I told her my decision. "Why stay in architecture when you could just manage your investments?" "Because this is who I am," I explained simply. "My father taught me that work should have purpose beyond money. I'm not going to abandon that principle just because I can." She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Richard would be proud of you, Emily." On the anniversary of my father's death, I visited his grave alone. The simple headstone stood in stark contrast to the elaborate Carter family mausoleum, where generations of the family were interred. Dad had chosen to be buried beside my mother in the small cemetery near our Brooklyn neighborhood, another choice that had scandalized the Carter clan. I placed fresh flowers on both graves, then sat on the bench nearby, looking out over the peaceful grounds. "We did it, Dad," I said softly. "The truth came out, just like you planned. Your legacy is secure now." The gentle autumn breeze rustled the leaves overhead, a peaceful counterpoint to the tumultuous year behind me. In my purse was the vintage Montblanc pen Harold had given me, now used daily as I signed documents for both the foundation and my architectural projects. As I sat there, I thought about the night of the Carter Gala, when Cynthia's cruel words had driven me to that Brooklyn diner. "You're broke, Emily. You don't matter anymore." The memory no longer stung. Instead, it reminded me of how far I'd come, not just financially, but in understanding my own worth, a worth that had never depended on Carter approval or Carter money. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Board meeting tomorrow. Ready to continue building something that matters?" I smiled, typing back. "Always." Rising from the bench, I touched my father's headstone one last time. The truth always comes to light, I whispered, and real worth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. As I walked back to my car, still the same sensible sedan I'd driven before the inheritance, I thought about the priceless expressions on my relatives' faces that night at Le Bernardin. The shock, the disbelief, the sudden recalculation of where I fit in their world. But the most valuable discovery hadn't been their reactions or even the wealth itself. It had been finding my father again, understanding the man he truly was, the choices he'd made, the legacy he'd left not just in trusts and assets, but in the values he'd instilled in me. Uncle Henry still ran Carter Financial, though with more oversight and less impunity. Aunt Patricia still hosted her society galas, though she now made a point of highlighting my foundation's work. Cynthia still cultivated her image as Manhattan royalty, though she no longer dared to dismiss me at family gatherings. And I had found my place finally. Not as the family disappointment, or even as the surprise heiress, but as my father's daughter in the ways that truly mattered, in integrity, in purpose, in building something meaningful that would outlast any fortune. Some said I'd been too generous in my settlements with the family, that I should have pushed for Henry's removal, that I should have demanded more public acknowledgement of the wrongs done to my father. But revenge had never been my goal. Justice had. Justice and truth. And in that quiet diner on the night of the gala, when Harold Whittaker had looked at me with recognition in his eyes and said those 5 transformative words, "You are the rightful heir," he hadn't just been talking about money. He'd been talking about character, about values, about the invisible inheritance that had always been mine, long before any trust matured. And that was truly priceless.